So remember in September 2015 in a favourites video I mentioned this book, Station 11, that I was definitely 100% going to do a review about, and then that never happened? Well, hi! Shortly after that video I lent out the book, so I didn't have the notes on it anymore because I wrote those down in the margins, and I didn't want to do the video without that, but I still haven't got that book back from my friend. Actually, Doro, what the fuck? What gives? But because Sanne from Books and Quills is reading this book as part of her sort of book club for the End of the World book club, I used that as an excuse to reread it, and I fell in love with it all over again, so here's a review. As you may have guessed, Station 11 is a post-apocalyptic novel set in North America, written by Emily St. John Mandel. It was my first novel by her. One, check out her other stuff because I love her writing style. And the apocalypse is brought on by this really rapidly spreading flu called the Georgia flu, because it originated in Georgia and then spread to Russia and then to, well, Europe and North America. It's essentially normal flu symptoms, just much, much worse and a lot faster. If you get infected, you feel sick within a couple of hours and you're dead fairly soon as well. The book opens with the death of a Shakespeare actor who has a heart attack on stage, so actually completely unrelated to the flu, but it's like the eve of the outbreak. And then the plot kind of delves into the outbreak and then switches to 20 years later. The Georgia flu has decimated 90% of the world's population, and the plot focuses on the Traveling Symphony, which is, as the name might suggest, an orchestra and a theatre company who travel through North America with like caravans to play music and perform Shakespeare plays. Because, as they take their motto from Star Trek, survival is insufficient. So they use their art to travel the country and connect with people and provide them with solace and also news from other places, because a lot of people have just found themselves into small communities in towns or whatever, and they don't really leave that place. But the story doesn't actually just stay there. You keep on getting flashbacks to the weeks of the outbreak, to a couple of weeks before or after, or even years before the outbreak. And the stories are all connected. You have these red threads that interlink people that don't really have anything to do with each other, but even 20 years apart, the stories still relate. For example, the focus on the Traveling Symphony plot is on Kirsten Raymond, who was a child actor in that King Lear play, where Arthur Leander, the Shakespeare actor, died. So she's still alive 20 years later. She's now in her late 20s, and the flashbacks are kind of triggered by items she comes across that have something to do with Arthur Leander that she doesn't even know, but then we get these glimpses into the past life. And it's so beautiful. The thing about this book is that it's very beautifully written, and it feels very much like poetic prose, but it's not as inaccessible and haughty as a lot of contemporary literary fiction is. So you get all the beauty without that holier than thou and too big for you to understand kind of literary fiction vibe that I at least always kind of struggle with. But at the same time, it doesn't just dumb things down so that you can understand it as the average reader. I loved how you could fit all the puzzle pieces together with the different storylines that are all interwoven and connected in some way, and you get to find out in which ways and who knew whom, and it's just so brilliant without being this kind of, there's a secret but you don't get enough information to figure it out, but it's also not too easy that you're just bored by everything. It's just done in such a magnificent way that you don't feel like you're being withheld information in order to drive suspense, but you're also not just, oh yeah, fucking called it. Of course, some things are predictable, but that doesn't ruin it. That's the thing, you can predict some plot points, but because there's no big reveal, but rather than the assumption that you will get there in your own time, it's just well done. I don't know how to finish this, but it's just ace. One thing that I'm not quite so sure about is that 20 years later there's still no electricity, there's no cars anymore because gasoline turns rancid or whatever after a couple of years, so they could use it anymore and apparently also not produce it anymore. I mean, of course society is in shambles and we're lucky enough never to have gone through a global apocalypse where we would have to find out how long it takes to get society back up and running, but I feel like it should not take people that long to figure things out, how to get electricity working, especially with something like solar panels. I don't think it would take more than 20 years. But suspense of disbelief, I'm just gonna take that at face value and roll with it. It's like a minor flaw. One thing I often think about when it comes to post-apocalyptic stories is that I can't really relate to them anymore because I would not be able to survive in such a scenario. I am useless without my medication, and I would probably be one of the first to die in that scenario. Thinking that is really weird because it puts those kind of stories in a really weird light. But Station 11, although they don't feature massively as main characters, which kind of a pity, it does mention stuff like what happens to the people that are in a wheelchair and that can't just leave the city on a motorbike or whatever, but have to rely on cars and get stuck in traffic. Or what happens if you're reliant on medication and suddenly there's no medication anymore. And Station 11 addresses that, and I really appreciate it. What I also really appreciated is the importance of certain items in the book. There's just this weird sense of continuity across different characters and across decades, which is just so beautiful. I can just really recommend that you pick this book up. It's a fairly easy and quick read, and so many beautiful quotes in there as well. Just love it. Alright, I'll see you next time with whatever kind of video that's gonna be. But yeah, bye! Definitely was gonna do a review a post-apocalyptic fiction. Essentially it comes with the normal flu system. It's essentially like normal flu system. It's essentially like normal flu system. But even bye, Sam.